Hi, and welcome to Zotalks. This is the show where we discuss all things mental health. We focus on adolescents, the mental health industry, and the education industry. This is also the show where we want to discuss the difficult questions. What are some of the burning questions on your mind that you want answers to? I'm Christina. I'm from Zoala. We're a generative AI tech startup company.
And I'm Joanna. I'm from wwyd, a youth counseling center. And today we have a special guest with us. We have Miss Jasmine. She's going to share more about her experiences raising a teen and how she has been trying to upkeep their mental health. So perhaps for our conversation, Jasmine, could you share with us a little bit more about yourself and your child?
Yeah, sure. Well, firstly, Christina and Joanna, thanks for having me. So like you said, I have a teen, a 14-year-old to be specific. I'm glad to be here today to share more, not just about her mental health, but also my mental health in raising a teen, because as raising a teen is not easy. Just to give a little bit of context, before we dive into the specifics. So my daughter was born in the US, so she spent the first couple of years in the US. But we moved back when she was 2, so we've been back for about 12 years now. So very much Singaporean, she's in a local school, but she's also very much influenced by the US culture, right? Like many of us are, including being on TikTok and social media. And I think this generation more so than ever are more influenced, by what they see online. So there's a little bit of a context around, setting up, her perception of, working with therapists and what she thinks about mental health in general. I'm also a working mom and a single mom, so a lot of balls in the air to juggle, but I believe quite strongly that, it's important to get all the support you need. So there are a lot of things that I outsource, and we can talk a little bit more about that later. But yeah, that's a little bit about me and my child.
Thank you, Jasmine. And so you mentioned previously that you take your daughter to private counseling. Can you share a little bit about how that started? Did you feel comfortable with that idea of counseling and your child going to counseling? And yeah, let's start with that.
Yeah, of course. So I always believed in counseling or therapy, and perhaps, like I said, I lived in the US a little bit, and pop culture, you have a lot of shows, where they always go see the therapist. So there was no stigma around that, at least for me. I think the biggest barrier for me was really the cost. It is not cheap to get, one-on-one counseling or therapy in Singapore. But when my daughter was a lot younger, I think she was probably around 6 or 7, even definitely before she started primary school, because her therapist went through that journey with her through primary school and secondary school. Like I said, I like to outsource a lot of things. So, swimming coach, whatever, right? So different type of outsourcing and helping my parenting. I felt like she needed additional help in terms of helping her manage her feelings, right? And we started pretty early. I think she was about 5 or 6. And I found a few different counseling centers. And there was one who specialized in what she called sensory therapy. So obviously she does talk to the child, and this was pre-COVID, so you could meet one-on-one in person, but she also had like little figurines and different things that she uses, so that, for especially with young children, if they are unable to verbalize how they're feeling, they could use the figurines, or they can tell a story or make up a story. And usually that's how she works to get into their inner mind. So she started that quite early, and she, I know it sounds strange to say she enjoyed it, but she really enjoyed those sessions, having someone else to talk to. And it's been a long journey. So we have had the same therapist since she was 5 or 6, who went through that transition of primary school and also the transition of secondary school. So obviously now that she's a lot older, she and her school schedule, she has like CCA 3 times a week. She has a third language, once a week. So she has very little time for therapy now. We still try to do it at least once a month or twice a month, depending on their schedules. But what I find it very helpful is that because of the years that she has spent in therapy, she has acquired tools on how to manage herself. And that's not to say that there's, you know, that is all love and peace at home, right? Like any type of, you know, reality, you know, there's still a lot of me screaming, you know, get your homework done, do this and that, and her also getting upset with me, oh, you don't get it, but for herself, she has acquired tools to sometimes say, okay, let me take a step back, and a couple of incidents. One is, I think we were in this thing where we were both it was getting quite heated. And then she's like, I just need 5 minutes by myself. And she's like literally saying, I need to just count for 5. And she's just give me 5 minutes. And I feel like if, you know, those were the tools that she picked up, right? And you know, I think there are other incidents as well where you know, she would say, you know, I need to do this to cope with my, you know, anxiety. And so I find that even though it's been long drawn, I don't see therapy as a quick fix. So, you know, it wasn't like we went to therapy because we're like, okay, there's a problem, now fix it. I really saw it as kind of like an emotional support for her, in addition to what I'm parenting, because I needed that help.
Nice. Okay. And you mentioned that your daughter started when she was around 5 or 6. And at that age, because there are school counselors as well, have you ever considered going to a school counselor, or what made the difference between attending and going to see a school counselor versus trying to see someone private outside?
I mean, at 5 or 6 is like she was in kindergarten, so she was in a small private kindergarten. There were not no counselors at that time. In terms of primary and secondary school, I believe most local schools do have counselors, but my understanding too is that the resources are really tight. So depending on the school, they might even have shared counselors between schools. And I know that because I have friends who are counselors and they do rotate between schools, or, you know, frankly speaking, like in a school with several hundred kids, if you have 1 or 2 counselor, how do you manage? And you would definitely just prioritize the quote unquote high risk, or, you know, with kids who have specific problems at that time. So again, that approach is more trying to fix a problem. And again, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that for me, I feel like counseling is, you know, really and it's therapy, right? It's not counseling. I think therapy and counseling are different, and I'm not an expert to say what it is, but from my understanding, counseling is you know, and Joanna, you probably will be more of an expert to say that, but I believe in therapy, which is ongoing. And I personally would do therapy for myself all the time. I feel like it's nice to just have someone to talk to deal with everything that we deal with in life. And sometimes my friends will like, stop talking to me, you should start talking to therapists. So again, for me, the biggest holdback around therapy is around cost, right? And you know, I think, you know, we are very privileged, and I'm very privileged to be able to provide that for my daughter on an ongoing basis, but it still costs a lot, right? And it's still and that's why we've also reduced the frequency now. But you know, I would do it for myself all the time, but if it's not for the cost, and again, I think resources are just so limited in the area of therapy. But I find it so helpful for us to deal with the ins and out of you know, modern life and what we have going on in the world right now.
And it's great that you had that period of where she was seeing continually, so that now you, as you mentioned, she's equipped. So even if it's lesser, it's okay. And at least she also knows that that resource is always there for her. If she feels like, oh, exams had come up, or I don't know, boyfriend, friendship problems, then she knows that's there, and you know, that once a month she can talk it out with that therapist. And I like that idea. I mean, it's, you know, it's a village, you know, outsourcing, and that's your village.
And you know, I always give this example where, you know, so, you know, in Singapore, everyone's really stressed out about Chinese. And I know friends who have kids starting from 2 or 3 where they start enrolling or putting themselves on a wait list for the best Chinese teacher, right? And, you know, these kids probably would start at 5 or 6 where they don't even start, you know, formal school yet, but they're building the foundation for Chinese, right? And that's the same concept that I have with therapy, is building that right foundation, right? And so for me, counseling, like if I only have that limited amount of money to choose between like tuition versus therapy, 100% I would choose therapy. And I know that's not the norm of thinking, but I feel like it builds foundation, ways for her to think about having tools to think about organization, to think about how she handles her stress, about anxiety.
Right.
And those are great tools to help her study in future, right? So but it's not really just studying, but you know what I mean? Like it's really just how you look at it. Because you could say, oh, just an hour for her to go talk to someone. But every time she comes out of a therapy session, actually in the last few years, because now that she's a teenager, a lot of things she keeps confidential. So she wouldn't tell me, but she's happy. She would come out and I was like, was it a good session? She was like, yeah, it's a good session. What do you talk about? A lot of stuff, but it was good. So, but you could tell that she was happy from that session and she was able to, air her grievance or, talk through some issues that she wasn't able to talk to me or maybe even her friends.
Nice. Okay. And like what you said, how like when you said it wasn't maybe not the normal way of thought where it's like you rather pay for therapy versus pay for tuition. Actually, I do agree because it's not just a quick fix like you mentioned. It's not like you go for 5 sessions and then the problem is gone. It's something that you really have to build upon and build your skills, build that understanding, that self-awareness, that foundation for you to become a better learner in the future, a better person, a kinder person, a more self-aware person. And then going back to what you mentioned that, how your daughter goes to therapy, but she doesn't really also share so much with you. Could you expand about that part a little bit more? What were some of your struggles when you faced as your daughter grew up and entered the teenage years?
I can't remember anything specific right now, but so I would do check-ins with the therapist, right? And and this was several years ago or even during COVID. So what was really good during COVID was that we had to transition to online therapy sessions. And the therapist was telling me that for some newer patients, or not patients, newer kids or clients, it was hard to build that connection. Whereas for my daughter, because they have that relationship already established, even now that we are, post-pandemic and, we can meet in person because of her schedule, without the shuffling and traveling, they still do more Zoom sessions versus in person, and they can still have that connection. And so I remember there was once, she had back-to-back session, and this during the pandemic, she had her therapy session and then she had her violin class, and both were online because it was the pandemic. And so I went downstairs, I left, I gave her the room, and then I heard her for her to do her therapy. And then I heard her playing the violin. And I was like, oh, she must be so confused. It's therapy first and not violin class. So I ran upstairs and I kind of knocked on the door and I was like, hey, I think you are in the wrong class. And she's like, I'm in therapy. I'm like showing her my song, and so like she's like, I'm playing her my song, and I actually until now I don't exactly know what was the conversation, but I what the therapist tells me is that there are things that she's really passionate about, and then that's how the therapist would draw her in. And because they have that relationship, so maybe at that day she would tell her I love the song or something. She would say, oh, show me the song or tell me about this, and then that's where we discuss other stuff. That's not to say that it's all fruitful, because whenever I do check-ins, like I said, with the therapist, I would say, hey, there was this incident, without going into much detail, but I would like some advice on, how and if she has spoken about it, just so that I can understand her perspective. And 9 out of 10 times, if it's an incident, right? The therapist would know about it, which means my daughter has talked about it. And my daughter would, and usually I would have these conversations after she spoke to my daughter. So it's not like she prompted her to ask. Like my daughter was very upfront about bringing it up. So yeah, I think it's just like going back to the original point around building that relationship. I think it's really important, right? And going back to your earlier point around counseling in schools, I think it's if it's trying to mitigate between two students, or if there's a broader thing that's very school specific, it's so helpful. but on a one-on-one basis, how it's so hard to remember each and every student in the school cohort, and everyone I would say needs support, right? So that's the challenge around. I mean, if the school counselor in her school would like to meet her, I would love it because it's just additional resource. But I feel like as a fundamental resource, I still need something for my daughter on an ongoing basis. And to be honest, now with her schedule, it's really only once a month or maximum twice a month, right? So it's not that intensive, but that's because we had that foundation built when she was much younger.
Yeah, okay. Just quickly going back to what Joanna mentioned just now about I suppose tuition versus therapy. I would like to call out that I suppose it's to the parent. I mean, some prioritize tuition. It's very understandable, especially in Singapore culture. But I really appreciate and I love the fact that yeah, you would prioritize your child's mental health and those foundations to yeah, very, very important in life. Can we I want to ask a question about stigma with your child, with your daughter in school. Does she openly share up that she goes to counseling or therapy? Does she feel like she needs to keep that private? How does she feel about stigma, mental health with her school friends?
Yeah, it's such a non-issue that we've not actually talked about it, but let me share a story. And this was probably when she was in a preteen, right? So I would say 9, 10, or maybe even 11. And she was hanging out with her cousins. And this was during school holidays. And I remember we were trying to make plans for something. And she said to her cousins, "Oh, I can't do next Tuesday. I'm meeting with Yana." Or she said it to me or something. And so her cousins were like, "Who's Yana?" And then I mean, at that age they can get sensitive about stuff. So like when when her cousin said who's Yana, I expected her reaction to be like trying to hide it or something, or so I was like, okay, like stone face, like let her lead it. And then without skipping a beat, she turned around, she's like, "Oh, my therapist." And then she went back, but then it was like there's no explanation of why she's seeing a therapist, blah blah. It could be like my piano teacher, it could be my yeah. So it was just, "Oh, my therapist," and then okay, so maybe we can do Thursday instead because I'm meeting Yana on Wednesday or something like that. And so, and then her cousins didn't ask more of it too, which was, I thought, interesting. And again, I think kids these days are very much exposed to this type of culture of seeing a therapist. Maybe not as much in Singapore, but with TikTok, like I said, in social media. But I do think in Singapore too, because I remember like being on a bus, last year, a couple of years ago, and there were two, I would say they're probably around, post-secondary school age, right? But they still look really young. And they were talking about, "Oh, my therapist says this," and then, "Oh, I went to the polyclinic, he referred me to a psychiatrist." But then like they were openly talking about it on the bus, right? This was probably before the pandemic too, because they didn't have their mask on, because I could clearly hear the conversation. So yeah, I think, yeah, maybe some people have that stigma, but I actually think it's also self-imposed. If you don't care about what people think and this is just a resource I need, then I think it is what it is. But for us, definitely there's no stigma in making sure that she has the support that she needs.
Nice. Glad that maybe because she had it since she was so young, that it was never like stigmatized as she was growing up, and it became so normalized to see her therapist. So then maybe just one more question, one final thought to end off. What would be your recommendation to any of our listeners, be it a teenager or a parent? What's your suggestion or advice for them about, seeking help, seeking therapy, seeking counseling?
Yeah. I would say there are actually a lot of resources out there. Like you said, in schools, there will be resources. But you need to want to go find the resources. So it took me a while, even, when my daughter was longer, to find the right therapist, right? And so go look for those resources. And also it's not a one hit finds all, like a tuition. Sometimes this tutor who could be a rock star, but might not be the right fit for you, right? Like you should try out different if the first one doesn't work, like don't just write it off, right? And say, oh, like this is just not for me. It could be that person, because therapists and counselors, they're all humans too, and people have different styles, different worldviews, right? So I actually did meet with a therapist for myself like many years ago, and it was definitely not a right fit. But he worked really well with one of my friends. And he does hypnotherapy, which also I felt like it was not my thing. It's like, I don't want to be hypnotized. I like to talk, as you can tell. I was like, I just want to talk. Like, I don't want to be hypnotized. So, but it worked for my friend. So that's not to say that if it doesn't work for me, it doesn't work for other people. So I guess it should be very personalized. And even we shouldn't say, oh, teenagers, this person specializes in teenagers. Yeah, they understand teenage kind of issues and what they go through, but then the style might not work, right? Or so be open-minded in trying it out before writing off early in the process.
Okay.
Great. Thank you so much for your time today, Jasmine, and joining us for this parent Zo Talk episode. I think we're running out of time, and we know you're super busy as well with your hectic life. But yeah, thank you so much for joining us today. And for viewers, let us know if what your thoughts were on this. If you're a parent, would you consider counseling or therapy for yourself? And yes, reach out to us. Would love to hear from you. LinkedIn, social media, YouTube, let us know. Thank you so much for your time today, Jasmine. Great sharing.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you,
Bye.
everybody. Bye.